My dream was always to get my own place. Ever since I was in high school, I really couldn't wait to move out because I hated my dad growing up and my mom wasn't much better. We would always butt heads and my dad would always be drunk on the weekends and honestly, it was just a mess. As I got older and girls obviously became a factor, it became even more of a problem because there was no way I'd bring any girls back to that household. So, because of all this, I took the first chance I could get and moved out when I was 19 in college. I didn't go away to school. I went to a commuter college not far from home. My parents wouldn't pay for me to go away to school, so I was on Zillow, Facebook, and Craigslist every day for a while. And when I finally found a rental that looked promising and affordable, I went to see it right away. The layout is pretty important, so I'll describe it now. As I walked in, I was welcomed with the living room/D area, which was one open space. Then there was the kitchen. Adjacent to that, which was separated by a wall. Then to get to the single bedroom in the apartment, you went down the hallway, which also had 2 closets. One which I used as a pantry and one as a storage closet. And then the door to the bathroom. At the end of the hall was the bedroom. The bedroom was generously sized. It fit a queen-sized bed easily. It had 2 more closets, and I fit a couple of dressers and a TV in there easily. I was sold immediately, especially because it was budget-friendly. I moved in the next month, and life was fine. Fast forward a few months, maybe. I went out with friends in town, and we ran into some girls we knew. I ended up taking this girl home that I'd known for a while through school, but we'd never hung out in that way. I'll just call her Sammy. We ended up drinking at my place and watching a movie, but that was really all we did. She didn't want to take it further than that on our first time hanging out, and I respected that. We ended up in the bedroom finishing the movie that we started in the living room, and I think we both just passed out from being drunk somewhere through the movie. The next thing that happened was I woke up to footsteps outside in the hallway. It was still the middle of the night. I looked to my side and I was alone in the bed. I jumped out of bed looking down the hallway and I saw Sammy in the living room grabbing her stuff off the couch, but she was doing so quietly. She was trying to leave now to avoid the awkwardness in the morning. And I understood that. So, I didn't say anything and went back to bed quietly. I heard her eventually walk out the front door. For good measure, I called out Sammy to no response, and that confirmed she was gone. I got comfortable in bed relatively quickly and drifted back off to sleep. It was probably another hour that passed when I woke to something loud. I immediately shut up in my bed and my heart started pounding relatively quickly. I called out Sammy again. There was no response. I was honestly kind of scared to get up and check. So, I picked up my phone and texted Sammy's number asking if she was still in my house. I realized that was a little weird to do, but I was actually scared in that moment. I looked at the door, which was still open because I was too lazy to get up and shut it after Sammy left. I was definitely still a little drunk from the shots we were taking in the living room, but I felt like I saw something wrapped around the door frame. My breathing only intensified. I still can't believe I had the balls to do this, but I swiped down on my iPhone to reveal the control panel thing and I pressed the flashlight button. And with the phone still pointed at the door frame, I realized there were 2 hands wrapped around the door frame. But as if responding immediately to being revealed, whoever's hands they were tightened and then pulled back out of sight. And the scream I was holding in for those 3 seconds finally came out, mixed with simply screams of dread. I also screamed, "Get out! Get out!" over and over. By the time I finally got up, I looked down the hallway. It looked empty. I flipped on the light immediately. After a few minutes of calming my breathing and just trying to listen for sounds, I built up the courage to check the hallway closets and bathroom, and they were clear. I then moved to the main living area, and trust me, there weren't any places to hide in there. I held my phone as if it were a gun as I crept to the nearest light switch and turned it on. I felt instantly better when the living space was lit up, but there was still the kitchen. I crept to the opening that led to the kitchen and flicked that light on as well, finally lighting up the entire apartment. There was no one here. I looked behind the couch. I looked under the tables. I even checked the floor-level kitchen cabinets. When I realized it was clear, I ran to the front door to lock it. The weird thing though was that I never heard the front door close, and yet there was not a single soul except for me in there. I now tried calling Sammy repeatedly until she picked up. When she did, she sounded tired and confused. I asked her if she was just in my house, and she told me she left a while ago because she couldn't sleep. I didn't explain. I just told her my bad. I thought I heard a noise and then we hung up. I decided to spam call my best friend until he picked up, also sounding tired and confused. I explained everything that just went down and he said he could tell I was still drunk. His explanation calmed me down, though. He said I was sleep-deprived and still drunk and I had a mid-wake-up hallucination. It made a little sense actually, considering I never heard the front door shut. I eventually could laugh it off and apologized for waking him up. I went back to my room, shut and locked the door, and I actually calmed myself down enough to fall asleep. The next morning, I did another search around the apartment, and it was without a doubt clear. So, I went on with my day. But at some point, I thought back to that supposed hallucination I had of those hands wrapped around the door frame the night before. I walked to my room and examined the door frame and I think my heart stopped for a moment when I saw obvious fingerprints left in the exact positions the hands I saw in the door frame had been. I felt dizzy coming to the realization that it wasn't a hallucination. I took this picture of it which I still have in my iCloud years later. I resorted to calling my dad for advice and he more or less called me a buffoon for not locking the door. But as long as nothing was stolen and no one was there anymore, take it as a valuable learning lesson. Honestly, nothing my dad said on that phone call was untrue, that's what sucks. I don't know who the hell came into my apartment that night, and I don't know why they chose to do the literal creepiest thing they could have possibly done. But after my year-long lease was up, I moved on and upgraded apartments and never looked back. My parents' house never really felt like a parent's house. Not in the normal way, at least. My dad traveled for work constantly, and my mom was always out with friends or staying over my aunt's house or doing something else where she'd come home late or not at all. I know that sounds kind of messed up, but it was just the reality. It wasn't like they abandoned me or anything. It was more like they were always busy and always somewhere else. So from the time I was like 16 and up, I basically lived alone. I ate dinner alone. Most nights. I watched TV alone. I'd be the only person in the house for an entire weekend. Sometimes. I'm an only child and I think that's because my parents realized after having me how much they valued their own freedom. So in that regard, I did suffer, which is something I feel more now as an adult. When I was younger, I used to love it because it felt like freedom having such a big place to myself. I could do whatever I wanted without my parents breathing down my neck, and I didn't have to share it with siblings. I could bring friends over and play games late. I could talk to girls on the phone without being embarrassed. It felt like having my own home without paying for it. And even when I turned 19 and started going to a nearby college, nothing changed. If anything, it got even more like that. My mom and dad were gone or out more. And I was basically just holding it down at home. I knew every noise that house made, too. That part matters because it wasn't one of those houses where every creak freaked you out. It was an older but larger house, and it had its usual sounds. I always just said the damn place had character. So, this happened on a night where I knew for a fact I was going to be alone. My dad was out of town for work and my mom had been talking all week about how she was staying at my aunt's because they were having some big family thing the next day and she didn't want to drive back late. I remember her telling me it's just you tonight and I honestly didn't even care. That was normal. I told her that she didn't even have to tell me that. I made food. I watched TV. I did the usual. At around 11 o'clock, I went upstairs to my room and started watching YouTube videos in bed. Something I do some nights for hours. My room was at the end of the hallway upstairs. At the top of the stairs, you'd have a small landing, and then to the right was my parents' room. And further down the hallway was the bathroom, the linen closet, and then my room at the end. I had my door open because my parents told me to keep doors open at night, more as a staying alert and listening for intruders type of thing. But I also liked hearing the house a little, like background noise. It made the whole being alone thing feel less intense. I eventually started getting tired, so I shut my laptop and just laid there scrolling on my phone. So, I'm going to just say that probably an hour passed from the moment I shut my laptop to when my phone rang. It said no caller ID on the screen. That was the first time I'd ever received a no caller ID phone call. I stared at it for a second. To be receiving that late at night was sketchy as hell. I ignored it, but it rang again right after. Still saying no call or ID. That's what made me answer. I figured if it was someone important, they would call twice. Plus, it's just a phone call. Worst case scenario, I hang up. So, I picked up. And at first, there was no noise. I got nervous that it was one of those scam calls that calls to see if a number is active to add it to some call center database. But then I started hearing something faint, and it took my brain a second to process what it even was. It sounded like a TV playing in the background. And what was weird was that I could also faintly hear my own TV downstairs through the door, because earlier I guess I left it on in the living room. I didn't have it on loud, just on low volume as background noise. So hearing TV audio on the phone instantly made my stomach tighten. I said hello a second time to once again no response, just the TV sound. There. Then I realized something that made me sit up in bed instantly. The TV noise I was hearing through the phone wasn't random. It matched my TV downstairs, like perfectly. It wasn't delayed. It was the exact same audio at the exact same moments. Like it was synced. That's when I got this cold feeling down my spine, because there's only one way that makes sense. That would mean whoever was on the phone could hear my TV in real time, as in they were inside my house downstairs. I tried to force a normal explanation, like it was a friend standing outside. One of my windows downstairs trying to trick me, or maybe the call was somehow glitching and picking up on my microphone audio. That can happen. But the more I listened, the more I realized that didn't make sense. It sounded like someone was calling me while standing somewhere in my living room. I got up and walked to my bedroom door and listened. And oh yeah, I was 1,000,000% sure now that the audio on the phone was syncing to the TV. In hindsight, this was dumb. But I screamed out, "Who's down there?" Because in the back of my mind, I thought for sure I knew it was a friend or family member pulling something. And then the line went dead. They hung up. By this point, my mouth went completely dry. I couldn't even call the number back because it was an anonymous call. I walked out into the hallway towards the stairs and I looked down. I still heard the TV on in the living room and then a creak. It sounded like the wood floor cracking from the pressure of a person. But if that didn't confirm things, the moment I heard someone clearing their throat downstairs, that's when everything instantly became 10 times more real. Didn't pick up. He may have already been asleep. It was like 11:30, so I called again and again, but no luck. I tried my luck with Uncle T, and he picked up on the second ring. I could tell he was in bed. He asked why I was calling, and I prefaced the phone call, telling him this might sound crazy, and then dropped the bomb and asked if he was downstairs. I remember vividly his exact response and tone as he said, "Steve, what the hell are you talking about?" When I elaborated, he told me that's definitely something his brother would do. His brother, aka my dad. While we were on the phone, my phone started vibrating. I looked at the screen and it was the no caller ID on the screen again. I begged my Uncle T to stay on the line real quick. I was putting him on hold as I picked up. He said, "Okay." So, I picked up the other call. As I said, "Hello." There was the same silence. This time, I didn't hear the TV sounds on the other end. What did that mean? It seemed they had the phone on speaker because I could hear their footsteps. They were moving and the footsteps were matching the footsteps I suddenly started hearing outside of my bedroom. I prayed with all my heart this was my dad messing with me. Then my doorknob jiggled and whoever was on the other side tried pushing the door. Thank God it was an old heavy door with an old heavy lock. The sound still synced with what I was hearing on the phone. Whoever was on the other side of the door knocked. I had the sudden thought to merge the two. My dad. Get here now. I also yelled that whoever was in the house was also on the phone with us. My uncle seemed to wake up from this and he started yelling into the phone things like, "I'm coming, you cocksucker." The no caller ID caller hung up the phone and I heard footsteps move away from the door. This all but confirmed it was in fact not my dad. My uncle told me to stay in the bedroom. He was on his way. I wasn't a little kid, but I wasn't some big brolic man either. I was some skinny 19-year-old. My uncle knew I was in danger. He started heading over to the house. We lived in the same town at the time, but that 7 minutes he took to get to the house was the longest 5 years I'd ever experienced. I heard the familiar voice of my uncle screaming downstairs finally, so I rushed out of the room and downstairs. Having him there made everything feel better. We called the cops together while searching around the house for stolen items. The TV in the living room was still on. Before the cops got to the house, we found the kitchen window to be fully open. Open enough for someone to crawl through. That info was, of course, relayed to the police, who when they got there did what I imagined to be a standard police search of the premises, asking us to lead them around the house, but from behind them. We cleared the whole house, and whoever was in there initially was no longer there. After the cops were done, they asked to see the no caller ID calls in my recent calls. I showed them and one of the officers told us that even though it says no caller ID, sometimes they can still request records and trace it from where it came. They said it could take a few days, but they'd get back to us. My uncle stayed over that night, which made me feel safer. We kept every light on like little kids. A few days later, one of the officers called me back. Surprisingly, the number was traced back to someone I actually knew. It was an old acquaintance from high school, not a friend or enemy. But someone who had my number and address and such. I hadn't seen him in years. The cops asked if I wanted to come with them while they questioned him. So, my uncle and I went since he was there on the scene with me originally. When the guy's dad answered the door and saw the police, he instantly called his son down without question. And I could see it in his son's face that he was nervous. The officer and I asked him straight up if he made those calls. He immediately said no. Then he said his phone had been stolen a few days ago. He claimed he lost it at a party and never got it back. The cop asked why he didn't report it stolen. He just shrugged it off and said he was going to get a new one anyway. The cop told him they'd follow up if needed. And that was basically it. His dad just stood there the whole time watching, but he weirdly didn't say anything. There was no big gotcha moment or arrest or anything. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The nervous look on his face when he came to the door. Was it a look of guilt or a natural look anyone would have when being greeted with police on your front doorstep? If it really was a stolen phone, that means someone stole his phone specifically to call me and break into my parents' house. And that's without a doubt scarier than if it was him. It was a weekend like so many before. The usual crew was getting ready to meet up at Cody's house to pregame and go out. This was post-college. We were all 23 to 24 at the time. Cody's house was often the spot to pre- and post-game simply because he had a cool basement. where his parents couldn't hear us, but also because his parents were chill. It was just the four of us going out to some local bars tonight. Cody, Randy, Jake, and I. When all four of us were there, we decided on who was calling the Uber. And once we did, we were out of there. Fast forward a few hours at a bunch of dive bars and then a dance bar. And eventually, Cody and I decided to go home. We were tired. Randy and Jake were staying out later. Cody called the Uber back, I think, and he offered me the pull-out couch in the basement when we got to his place. He came downstairs with me to help me set it up. And while down there, we played a game of Madden. Honestly, I've always sucked at Madden, so he destroyed me and I didn't want to play again. I was tired and just wanted to sleep the alcohol off before I made the inevitable hangover even worse. Cody went upstairs and shut the door and I was left alone in the darkness. The only thing that kept that basement from being complete and total blackness were the lights from the cable box clock under the TV, the actual standby light of the TV itself, and a slight green glow from a Heineken mini fridge on the other side of the basement. That mini fridge would also provide some weirdly relaxing white noise that would help me fall asleep. So, things faded to black as I knocked out like a baby, a drunk baby. I woke up and it was still dark. I didn't know what time it was, but I knew it was still late at night or super early, whatever you want to call 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock a.m. My mouth was so cotton-mouth dry, I could actually barely move my mouth. I stupidly didn't think to bring down a bottle or a glass of water before going to sleep. After drinking all that alcohol, it was no wonder I woke up. I just really didn't want to get up, though. It's a very familiar and relatable conflicting feeling that anyone who's woken up hungover and thirsty has felt. I tried to ignore it at first. I rolled over to get a look at the Heineken fridge to see if anything was in there, but it was just alcohol. And then, for whatever reason, my eyes darted to the other corner of the room. I felt like my eyes were playing tricks on me at first, but I could swear I was looking at a black mass in the corner of the room. A black mess that I didn't remember seeing there ever before. I tried to wait for my eyes to adjust better to the dark, expecting the black mess to be some coat on a coat rack or something. But the longer I stared, the more I realized it was moving. It was a person. The amount of restraint I had to not scream was insane. I didn't think it was Cody just based on the sheer height of the mass alone. Without panicking, I had to figure out how to get out of there. After a tense couple of minutes, I sat up and fake yawned as if I was stretching, pretending I didn't notice that person in the corner. I then started fake talking to myself, like muttering complaints about not bringing water down here. Anything to give the appearance that I was oblivious and just going to get water, not run away and alert anyone. I got up and walked closer to the stairs, but also closer to the figure in the corner. And perhaps the most tense moment of my life was when I turned to the right to get to the stairs and I hoped I wasn't grabbed. When I started going up the stairs, I didn't run or anything. I took it slow and normal to not draw a suspicion. But when I was about halfway up, I took a curious glance down the stairs, and that black mask was now at the bottom of the stairs, and I can confirm it was a person. I almost tripped as I started to run up the rest of the stairs and slammed the basement door shut. I then started running up the stairs to the upper level of parents' room where we woke up his dad and I told him, "There's someone in the basement." He got right out of bed without asking questions and ran down both flights of stairs to the basement, noting that the basement door was wide open. And when I mentioned I shut the basement door, Cody's dad yelled at Cody to call the cops, and he did. We also noticed the back door to the house was now open. So when the three of us were done looking through the basement, we all went to the backyard to search, then the front yard, and then the neighboring yards. All while Cody was still describing what was going on to the 911 operator. I'd say we were searching for 15 minutes before the police finally arrived. And then they did their full search and formally wrote up a report for the incident.